1, 2. How y'all feel out there? All right.
When I said that you are one of the premier storytellers in many fields, that includes you're a DJ, you're a filmmaker, and journalist, a writer, you design streetwear, you know, one of the prime sneakerheads of your days. How do you do all these things without having a cell phone?
Well, I do now have a cell phone. I have a child. I'm married. My wife put the hammer down when our son was able to walk, and I started taking him to the playground, and she said, you know what, Bob? All that no cell phone is cute, but you're getting a cell phone. And as any married people here know, when your wife talks, you got to listen. So I now have a cell phone, but I haven't really let it change my culture of communication. And I always remind people that, you know, human beings did very well without telecommunications for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years. It's really a recent phenomenon in the last century, and cell phone use is only less than 2 decades deep. So we're very capable of making plans and planning ahead and organizing so that we stay in contact with people and that we're present. And that was my reason for not having a cell phone for a long time, was because I was finding that while people were able to communicate with more, they were communicating less in an intimate setting. So yeah, but I have used the cell phone to my advantage, and my Instagram following now is at 30,000. Just getting a cell phone. So there are some advantages.
Right. And besides being new to the cell phone family, to the 21st century, you left New York very recently. How does that feel for someone who spent quite a few decades in the Big Apple?
Well, I have not spoken about this publicly, so thank you for putting it on blast. But that's fine. We're not avoiding any questions today. Stretch Armstrong, how many of you familiar with him? All right, cool. So we did a documentary titled Stretch and Bobbito Radio That Changed Lives. It's available here in Bulgaria on Netflix. It's available in 192 countries. The success of that film led to National Public Radio in the United States approaching us about doing a new podcast. We hadn't done radio on a regular basis since 1998 when we parted ways. NPR's headquarters are based in DC. My wife is born and raised there, and we have a 3-year-old who is very energetic and likes to run around. And we just decided as a family to make the move to explore the potential for what the platform can be, but also to just switch up the environment. And you know, being 50 years old and having checked off everything on my bucket list for life goals, I felt like, you know what? I've lived a complete and full life in New York. It's okay if I make a change. At age 25, I would have never done that. But at age 50, we can invite that. And it's been great. And DC is close to New York, so I'm up there every single week.
Perfect. So maybe we can listen to a track that will kind of bring us back to Harlem and back to New York real quick. Just to set the mood for everyone.
Yeah, sure. Can y'all give a round of applause for that song? That was my father playing vibraphone on that song, yeah.
And that's the only recording that can be found of his?
Well, that can't even be found. So a little background, the artist is Elenita Ruiz, and I don't know much about it at all. My father was a Latin jazz musician who performed at the Palladium. He did some community centers and weddings, wedding events with a little band called Ramon Garcia y su conjunto. And in all the years, I knew that he had done some songwriting, and he had a lot of jams at the house growing up. But it wasn't until after he passed away 20 years ago in 1997, and one of his musician friends hit me up some years afterwards, and he was like, "Hey, Bobby, come over to the house. I just found something." And I was like, "Great." So he lived in the neighborhood, and I stopped by. Willie Hernandez, he was a flute player in my father's band, and he said, "You know, here, this is for you. I think you should have it." And I looked at the 7-inch, it's old from like the early 60s, and wasn't familiar with the artist, wasn't familiar with the label. And he said, "Your father played vibes on that." And I was just like blown away. And upon listening to it, you know, obviously got emotional because he was no longer with us. And so I spoke to some of my family members. They were unaware of the song as well. So then in 2009, myself and one of my best friends, Rich Medina, we did a compilation for a label called R2 in London, in the UK, called The Connection. And it was modern explorations in Afro-Latin and Afrobeat. And that was one of the songs that we included on the compilation. On my side, we did like a double CD. And the licensing supervisor could not find the master or publishing owner for the song. It's that rare. And I don't believe that the singer isn't even alive anymore, so it's unfortunate that I can't find out more about that song, but it speaks volumes to me just hearing it now. Like I've played it at sets, but never like at the height of the night, usually like really early on when nobody's in the room. So this is the first time I'm hearing it with the community, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful song, so I hope you all enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing with us that song and that story. But is it fair to think that that might be the music that was all around you while growing up? That style of music, was it Latin music, or what was the soundtrack to your upbringing? In that
well,
regard?
yes. I was very fortunate and not fortunate in that my father was a musician, so I was exposed to some of the very greats of Latin jazz in my house, many of whom I had no idea that they were as famous as they were or as accomplished. Most notably, a tenor saxophone player by the name of Jumbo Silva, who played with Cal Jader, Mongo Santa Maria, recorded some of his own albums as a band. He was from Cuba, had moved to the States in the 50s, and just took over. I mean, he was the prominent tenor sax in Latin jazz. You know, I'm 4 years old, 5 years old. I want to watch cartoons in the morning on Saturday, and these guys are like jamming out. You know, not Saturday morning because they got together, like Friday night going into Saturday morning. You know, so I couldn't really appreciate it as a child. I didn't have sophisticated enough ear. It wasn't really until I got to my adulthood, and you know, a lot of thanks to hip hop, because if you're ahead, especially in the 90s where we were really going deep with sampling, a lot of us started to dig a little bit deeper, like, what is this foundation music that's feeding all this incredible rap music? And so we started digging for, you know, soul, funk, jazz, disco, world music, African music, Latin music. And it was at that moment that I got so intrigued and fascinated by the music from before that I started really diving into Latin music, maybe more so than other DJs that I know, because yo soy Boricua, you know, I'm Puerto Rican. So, and discovering that Ray Barreto had been to my house and Joe Bataan had been to my house, and that my brother studied under Charlie Palmieri. And I mean, it was like, once the floodgate opened and my mom, you know, because my father was no longer around, started telling me who had visited the house and played, it was like, holy fucking shit. You know, my dad, one thing I did know about my dad was that he opened up for Tito Puente, who is the foremost Latin musician of all time. I mean, 100 albums recorded. I mean, there may be singers who have sold more records, but I'm just talking about in terms of critical acclaim and really pushing the envelope and just being so creative. Tito Puente is like top of the food chain, and my father really looked up to him and opened up for him at the Palladium, that was like the biggest club for Latin music in the world in the 50s and 60s. And that was a huge deal to our family. My father, you know, years later, you know, until his death, that was like his shining moment, you know. And it wasn't like really the biggest shine. It wasn't like he was the headliner. He was just the opening act. But that was a big deal for him, and we were all very proud of his moment. A lot of this stuff, I will go into deeper detail in my next film. It's titled Rock Rubber 45s. It's in production right now. It'll be out in 2018. If you enjoyed my first film, Doing in the Park, or my second film, Stretch Armstrong Bobbito, I hope that you keep an open mind and keep it on your radar for Rock Rubber 45s, and hopefully maybe Red Bull can bring me back out and we'll do a screening and, you know, Q&A for it and everything. So, yeah. Shameless plug there for all you people online.
Fair enough. So what was the first music that you felt was yours? Because growing up in a musical household, there's their music and you might enjoy it, but there needs to be some form of rebellion even where you have like your own, that's my shit. You don't understand this. What was it and how did you find it?
That's a great question, and it's never been posed quite in that manner, so I appreciate your line of thinking. My father, while he was very proud to be Puerto Rican, and my mom, you know, born in PR and moved to New York, they both were incredibly open-minded individuals, and I'm thankful for that. So they both listened to Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Natalie Cole, Dinah Washington. You know, it was opera, classical music, Tchaikovsky, Pavarotti. I mean, you name it. Like, there was so much music in the house. And when I was 7, I had a moment in the living room to myself. And my father had played Stevie Wonder quite often in the house, and it was the first time where I was gonna select a song myself without my brothers telling me, shut that shit off, or, you know, whatever. And I pulled out Intervisions. That's the first album that I ever played and listened to side A, side B, all tracks on my own. And imagine that, if you're familiar with that album, imagine that being your introduction to the LP format. I was blown away. And so I claimed that. Stevie Wonder really spoke to me. And then the next sort of movement that I was able to really claim was my introduction into hip hop. And understand, in the 70s, no one called it hip hop. We didn't know that it was going to be this global, you know, force that would sustain, you know, for decades and impact the world. It was just something that we just, you know, you played basketball, you played tag, you played football, and, you know, you listened to music with your friends and you danced and you rhymed, and that's just, it was just part of the daily experience. And when I got involved in that, it really hit a chord with me that was unlike soul music, or unlike Latin music, or unlike anything else I'd heard. And it was fun. It was really, really fun. And even sonically, I remember the first time my friend Timmy Fobbs on the 12th floor of my building played Trans-Europe Express by Kraftwerk. I mean, we went into this bedroom and he was like, yo, I got this new record. I want y'all to check it out. And we were playing electronic football. I don't know how old all of you are, but there used to be this board, and you would plug it in, and the little men, the board would vibrate, and the little football men would go, but they would never go straight. It was a pointless game. They would always go out of bounds, It was, you could never win. You could never even play it. It was just a shitty electronic game. I'm digressing, but he played Kraftwerk, and we all sat there in 1977, like with our jaws open, like, what the, you know, you got to think like, you know, electronic, a lot of stuff that we just assume and take for granted, you know, it was mind-blowing to be introduced to this, you know, mind-blowing. And then to hear it on warm analog vinyl too is, you know,
did you understand that it was sampled by others? Did you understand at the time that
it wasn't sampled yet?
No, but shortly after, when the first records came in that used these other records, when Soul Sonic Force came in, did you understand that, like, that connection?
I did not see the continuity at the time. It's really when I became like a journalist and a critic and an advocate and an evangelist and someone who was almost like an ambassador in the 90s, that I was able to look back and be like, oh yeah, like Bambaataa, Arthur Baker, they were using these electronic sounds. At the time when, you know, Tommy Boy was releasing all that music, we were just enjoying it. No one was really trying to critique it. It was just like, oh man, this is the jam, let's dance to it, you know? It was like, oh man, I hear it. I hear the sample. That's the snare drum from 1978. You know? You know, we weren't nerds yet. You know, we became nerds in the 90s. At least I did.
So I assume that you split your time between being on the court as someone who had like high hopes for a sports career as well, and you know, being with music friends, talking about music a lot. What was the power ranking back then? Was basketball more important for some time?
So there was no split. Let me make it clear. I played ball as a kid every day. That was my complete existence. From 1980 to 1988, I only missed 3 days of playing basketball. That's it. And I know that for a fact because those 3 days I was actually sick. Holidays I hated because the gym would be closed. So that meant I had to sneak in the gym or I had to play outside in the cold, which is fine. But I had lofty goals of playing professionally, and I was very driven, and I was immersed in this basketball culture. And so it wasn't like I wasn't going to clubs back then. I wasn't DJing back then. I wasn't a radio host. That all comes later in the 90s. In the 80s, it's all about basketball. Anything that revolved around hip-hop and music was a byproduct of that. Okay, we're at the court. They're playing Treacherous 3 Body Rock during halftime and before the game. Wow, that song is incredible. Okay, we just went to camp in Spanish Harlem. Got to go get lunch before we're going to go back out to the park and play again. We're eating lunch. Yo, did you hear the Grandmaster Flash? Shoo-wah now. Yo, you got a tape of it? Yo, let me get a dub. It was like the music conversations were byproducts. The basketball was the thread of the day. That was my experience. You know, there are people who their entire existence was hip hop, and basketball was the backdrop. They were a fan of the Knicks, or I wasn't a fan. I was an active participant of basketball. So I started coaching basketball when I was 15. You know, so
more time in the gym.
Yeah, gym and outdoors. So that was, you know, and it paid off. You know, I played professional basketball in Puerto Rico in 1987, and that's a career highlight for me amongst many that came years later. But that one, I really, really worked hard to get, and I had no business playing professional basketball.
So fill in the gap for us. You played professional basketball in Puerto Rico, but you also shortly after got involved in the music biz, working for Def Jam. Shortly after, what happened? What was the?
Yeah, well, so I went to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, from 1984 to 1988. Between my junior and senior year, that's when I played professional basketball. And I returned to school, finished my studies, graduated, and let me backtrack. A year prior to that, I started hanging out with two artists by the name of MC Search and Promise Pete Nice, who wound up becoming the group Third Base, got signed to Def Jam. And we just did a lot of things together. You know, we hung out, we all played ball. You know, I used to give Search haircuts. Pete Nice I used to give him haircuts. I would go, you know, to shows with them. I was dancing for them at one point. And one day, you know, Search and Pete hit me up and they were like, yo, there's a job opening at Def Jam as a messenger. And so I went with it. You know, I had a sense when I graduated from college that I wasn't going to be an all-star in Puerto Rico. I wasn't going to make the national team. I was very honest with myself. Sure, maybe I could have went back and played more and maybe had an impact there, but I didn't really see that happening, although I was still curious about it. But shit, I'm in New York. It's the Mecca of basketball. You know what I mean? Like, can't stop me from playing. I'm playing in tournaments. So I had that for the fix, for the Jones. Like, oh, I can play ball every single day. I'm still playing ball every day. I'm not getting paid for it, but who cares? Like, I already got paid for it. I know what that feels like. Let me challenge myself and do something else. And I had a sense that maybe there was something in the music industry for me to pursue. And it paid off. You know, I got a job at Def Jam at 89. And I moved up the ladder very quickly there because I was super hardworking and passionate about the label and what they represented. I mean, fuck, yo, we had Public Enemy, LL Cool J, Third Base, and Slick Rick. Are you shitting me? Like, you know, it was like the 5 biggest, you know, and the Beastie Boys had came out prior to that, even though they weren't on the label anymore. But, you know, we're talking about the prominent label, not just of the year, the decade, you know, and the opportunity to work there was priceless. And I milked that for all I could.
And it's also where you met Stretch Armstrong for the first time.
Yes.
In the offices over there.
So Stretch Armstrong and I met at Def Jam. He came by to pick out some records, and we hit it off immediately. And then, you know, some months later, it was so instantaneous. We wound up starting a radio show in 1990, and, you know, 8 years later, we look back and, you know, all these unsigned artists that came through our doors wound up changing the face of, forget rap, I'm talking about music industry, period. The short list is...
yeah, let's do a quick roll call, maybe.
Yeah, Nas, Biggie, Wu-Tang, Mobb Deep, Prodigy, rest in peace, Big Pun, rest in peace, Big L, rest in peace, Eminem, Jay-Z. Those were the unsigned artists that came through our doors, and there were a ton of artists who were signed, like the Fugees and Cypress Hill, who had no props until they came through our doors, and then, you know, their careers started changing after that. So we were fortunate in that we were in a position to highly influence our audience with our tastes, and also highly influence artists and musicians with their tastes. Because once the light bulb went in people's head that, oh man, if I make this song and it's experimental, there's a home for it to be heard, right? So that opened up the door for people to kind of branch out. So we had a great run, and it's documented in the film Stretch and Bobbito, Radio That Changed Lives. And the reason why it's titled that is because it was transformative for myself and Stretch, for the artists as well, but really for our listeners. And so there's 3 narratives in the film. We interviewed the common person that none of you know, because to me, as a director and the writer of the film, it was just as important to hear what people went through to listen to our show in an age where it was not accessible. Completely different to now, where everything is accessible so long as you have Wi-Fi. Yeah, it was a an amazing project to be a part of.
And you really had to search for it. You had to know where to find it. And it's like we're talking about dialing in.
Yeah. And if you missed it, you had to ask a friend to tape it for you. And if you lived outside of the radio signal, you had to hope that, I knew people from France that would fly into New York just to tape our show and then go back and bootleg our show and sell it. And our show got bootlegged all around the world, which when we found out about, we weren't completely too mad about, because it brought our names to cities we had never gone to, but also we were in it to share the very best music that was available in hip hop. And so by virtue of the bootlegging, it helped a lot of artists that were getting played on our show that weren't getting heard otherwise. And that helped create a platform that some artists from the 90s are still living off of today. There are artists that are still touring and still doing shows and, that came through our show and got known through the tape circuit. This is pre-internet, so it was a beautiful thing.
Did that come in handy while producing the film? The fact that all over the world people might have bootlegs, because I assume you couldn't have like a DUT running all the time or something. You must have forgotten to record some of those. We did.
Recently, Prodigy from Mobb Deep passed away. Big loss to the hip hop community. The first time he came up with Havoc was in April 1st, 1991, when they were unsigned. They were a group called Political Prophets. 4 years later, they splashed as Mobb Deep with their album and, went platinum and everything. But we didn't record that night, The first night Biggie came up as an unsigned artist in 91, we didn't record that night. It's like, we didn't know these guys were going to become who they became, For that, if we knew, we would have had 2 cameras up there. We would have hired the 2 of you, because you're so handsome. And we would have, weekly recorded video and audio, but we didn't. We were just trying to play the best artists that were out, whether they were signed or not. And it was years later that we were like, holy shit, Nas just blew the fuck up. Like, we should have filmed that, yeah, there were definitely some nights that were not filmed. The Biggie night, we actually wound up finding the audio when we made the film. So for those of you who saw, that was the first time Stretch and I had heard that freestyle since it was performed live in our studio, and it's a highlight of the film for a lot of people.
We actually have that queued up. We have the freestyle queued up, so we can play that. That's track 4. That's the audio from the actual movie, so you'll hear a little bit in the beginning and at the end. But just to hear a 16-year-old Biggie. It's a whole lot of cursing for a 16-year-old.
But he was actually 17 at the time. That was a little fact check that we found out after the interview. But props to 50 Grand, his original DJ, who produced that demo. Well, he didn't produce. He produced the Biggie's demo, but he was also the only person that we found who actually recorded that night that Biggie came up as an unsigned artist. And for those of you who don't know, Biggie wound up becoming, him and Tupac, the premier artist of the 90s. His second album sold 10 million copies, the first hip hop artist to ever sell that many copies. So he's very large in the history, and we were just, in the right place at the right time with the right open mind to have invited him up.
And the craziest thing is he came in at 16 or then 17 and already had the flow locked down, like the Biggie flow. It's already there. That's the craziest part. People forget like how young they were when they passed away, both of them. So Biggie, the story behind that is pretty crazy, right? He didn't get rejected, but he lost a demo battle or something. He sent in a demo and it lost against another group, right? By the name of not Brooklyn Zoo.
So Bronx Zoo. Yeah. What we used to do on a radio show was because we wanted to play the very best music and have the very best MCs unsigned or signed on our show, we used to invite people to mail in their songs. Didn't matter to us whether they were signed or not. And so, we had Bronx Zoo, and we had Biggie's demo, and we played them one against each other, and we would just open up the phone lines and be like, yo, call in and vote for the best demo of the night. And Bronx Zoo won, you know. So, but I think Biggie in the long run won a little more. Maybe a lot more.
Shout out Bronx Zoo.
Yeah.
Wherever you may be.
I like their demo, you know. Biggie was pissed off that they beat him, so that's when that's why he came up and he was like, I want to set the record straight. He actually wanted to battle them live in the studio. That's why he came up there. So, I mean, artists used to come up to our show very focused. You know how like before a basketball game, you know, the team is with the coach and in the locker room, and they're like, that's how artists would come up to our station, you know, because they knew like the world was going to hear them. And for some of them who were unsigned, that was everything to them. They didn't know that they would get signed, you know, so they really took it seriously. So, yeah.
So in retrospect, all these big names that came through, it's quite surprising to think that that was your side hustle, right? For you and for Stretch. That was one of the things you did at the time. But it was not like you got paid crazy money from a big broadcasting corporation.
Well, we did the show for free. I mean, it was college radio. So we invested a lot of resources to produce a weekly program that took a toll. I mean, we were on the air from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. That's not an easy time slot, you know. You go to bed at like 6 a.m., 6:30. How many DJs are here? I know you used to DJ. Okay. You ever do a gig and afterwards you're on a music high? You know, because like it's like, oh my God, I just heard all this incredible music, and you go home, you take a shower, and you can't go to sleep because you're just like the music is just, it's like, oh my God. Think about that on a weekly basis. You know, we're hearing the most incredible MCs in the world, women and men, you know, and you go home at 5:30, 5:45, so you can't go to sleep. You know, we used to go home when me and Stretch were roommates, and we would put the tape onto the show. You know, when we would get home, we'd go to bed at like 6:30, 7 a.m. I had a regular job. I worked at Def Jams. I had to go to work the next day. So it was taxing. It was really taxing. And it hurt the most on the basketball court. Because then I have a game Friday night, Saturday, and my body would just be like taxed. And I would play like shit. And then people knew who I was because I was on the radio. So like, it's not a big deal when no one knows who you are and you play like shit. When you go to the court and everybody knows who you are, you know, it's like, oh man, you know. So yeah, that was tough. When I retired from radio, I did not miss it. To this day, I do not miss the time slot. It was hard.
Although, to be fair, when you did the reunion, the 20-year reunion of the broadcast, you still went for the same time slot. You went the full.
Yeah, well, originally I told Stretch, I said, I don't want to be up until 5 a.m. I'm in my 40s now, you know. I'll stay up there until 3 a.m., I promise. And 3 a.m. came along, and I was not cognizant of the time at all. 5 a.m. came along, I was like on a high. I was like giddy. I felt like I was 25 years old again. 6 a.m. came along, like, can we just keep on going? Like, you know. And this is completely drug-free. I don't drink. Nothing. I'm like, this is just straight, like drinking water and being in the studio, just high off of music, you know, and the euphoria of the listeners and the artist, and, you know, the radio show that we did, it meant a lot. I'm very happy that we're going back on the air with National Public Radio in the United States with a podcast, although it's not going to be a music show. It's not going to be a mix show. It will be an interview-based podcast where we go in depth about just kind of like what you're doing with me, with our guests. And we've already recorded some, and we have some phenomenal interviewees that run the gamut from politics to film to music to hip hop to literature to art world. So a lot of people are going to be shocked. Some people might be disappointed, actually, because they're going to be like, yo, where's the hip hop? But it's like, I'm 50 years old now. I was never solely defined by hip hop, not even in the 90s. That's what got me out into the world, and I'm thankful for it. But Stretch the same thing. You know, we have multiple interests, and we're diverse characters, and we want the podcast to shine the light on all that is important to us.
Were you intimidated by that? Because if you take away the music element, I mean, the radio show was always defined by the chemistry that you and Stretch had, pretty much. And the beautiful thing about the film that you made about it, like the real triumph of the movie, really is the restoration of that friendship, I'd say. Were you intimidated by the fact that now it's all on us? It's all on us and the guests? Because the music element was so...
No, I'm not intimidated. I've interviewed Stevie Wonder, Michael Jordan, Shaka Khan, Gil Scott-Heron, Isaac Hayes, Dan Marino. I mean, you know, I've interviewed some of the most famous people in the world. You know, Quincy Jones. You know, for my film, my next film, Rock Rubber 45s, I interviewed Lin-Manuel Miranda, Tony Award winner. You know, I mean, this dude is like insanely popular globally. You know, Hamilton and The Heights, and you know, now he's doing films with Disney. It means nothing to me, you know. You put me in front of somebody who is cool and has a story, I'm gonna talk to them the same way I would to Irina, you know, about the history of Bulgaria. You know, it's something that I'm fortunate in that I've always been able to make people feel comfortable around me. And Stretch is you know, as a unit, that's what we're doing with the podcast. We're really getting people to open up. I can't wait for all of you to hear it. It goes live July 19th this summer on NPR.org as well as NPR One app.
I would like to back up real quick and talk a bit about you as a filmmaker and the various things that you've evolved into. Because it seems that, and with all respect, it seems that you get into things without being trained for it, and then excel pretty amazingly at them, just by virtue of having the opportunity to do them and then going at it. So maybe if we can watch the video number 2, that's from your first film, Doing It at the Park, which you co-directed with Kevin Coolio from France.
Yep.
It's a little segment from that I would like to play. A lot of things. So that was Crazy Legs, legendary b-boy from the Rocksteady crew. You are in some form affiliated with the Rocksteady crew. How come? Did you also break at some point?
Yeah, no, I never broke. I grew up being friends with members of the Rocksteady, even before Rocksteady formed. Ken Swift and Doze. We used to play football with each other. And then I grew up in Rocksteady Park, which the basketball world called the GOAT. It was named after playground legend Earl Manigault. So I used to see all the Rocksteady crew members, you know, practicing. I witnessed all that, but I wasn't active in it because in the 80s, as I mentioned to you, my whole life was basketball. In the 90s, when I started putting some time into being a hip-hop participant as well as activist, Legs and I, our paths were bound to cross. And we met in 1991, and we hit it off immediately because we were both Puerto Rican, both had a lot of similar experiences growing up, you know, knew a lot of the same people. And, you know, we both really wanted to see the best for the culture in the decade. And so we started collaborating on events. Early on, his goal was to bring back the park jams of the 70s because they kind of like disappeared towards the late 80s. And so a couple of members of the crew passed away. and unfortunately someone murdered, and the Rocksteady Crew anniversary was founded to commemorate the ones who had passed, but also to try to give younger people the experience of the outdoor park jam. So we started in 1991. Because of my position with the radio show, I helped program it, because any of the artists who were nice on the mic, I was like, yo, here's who we should have perform. And then Legs asked me to host it, and then, you know, it took off. I mean, by 95, 96, we had like by 94, 95, we had like 5,000 people from all over the world flying in to be a part of the Rocksteady Crew annual anniversary at Rocksteady Park, AKA the GOAT, which is where I grew up. So yeah, it was a special time. And then I started DJing towards the mid '90s and late '90s, and Legs put me down to Rocksteady, not because I was a dancer, but because of Rocksteady is not just a dance crew; it's an organization really to advocate for all elements and the experience of hip hop. And so I was a natural selection for him. Because it's also a family too, you know. Not like there's a lot of talented b-boys and b-girls out there that aren't in Rocksteady. Rocksteady is very much about like, okay, we get along, we support each other, and so that's how I got down back then. So yeah.
And so what really nicely ties in what you already said. Everything happened on the playground and on the courts. It was like a whole cultural hub there, basically. What we just saw in this short sequence, coming back to you as a filmmaker, the gentleman before Crazy Legs also appears in your second film, the Stretch and Bobbito film.
Yeah, his name is Anthony Alonso.
And how do you know him?
Well, so part of me hosting shows with Rocksteady and with the radio show with Stretch led to me hosting events across the board. And in '93, I started hosting the very first showcase, which combined hip-hop, spoken word, and jazz. It was originally called Bebop, and then it became known as All That, and moved to the New York Poets Cafe. There, I met a ton of poets, some of whom became very well known in the space, and many of whom, the first time they ever performed, I had brought them on stage. Again, this is going to be detailed with archival footage and archival photos in my next film, Rock Rubber 45s. But Nympho 9 was one of those spoken word artists. And his real name is Anthony Alonso. He was one of my favorites when I was doing New Eurekan. And unfortunately, in '96, I believe, he got incarcerated. And he was inside for 13 years. And I stayed in contact with him the whole time, wrote him letters, visited him. And when he came out, you know, as a filmmaker, as a first-time filmmaker, I felt that perhaps there was a way to help expose his sort of forgotten talent. Because, like, he was part of a class in New Eurekan that included Saul Williams. Anybody heard of him? He's like the premier spoken word dude. You know, Lemon Anderson, Tony Award winner with Def Jam Poetry, you know, Suhair Hamad, another Tony Award winner. I mean, like, Nympho 9 was part of all these. He was their contemporary, and they all had a lot of respect for him. So I asked Anthony, I said, are you still writing? Well, I knew he was still writing because he would write me letters from prison, and some of which had contained poetry. So I felt like it was a good platform for him because he loves basketball, and I invited him. I thought he killed it. And he does a poem in the second film, Stretch and Bobbito. I don't know that we'll have him do a spoken word in my next film because I don't want to, you know, you can't like run it to the ground. But lovely dude, very dear friend, and yeah, I just wanted to give him the props that he deserved.
So the very interesting approach that you took for doing it in the park, for the history of pickup basketball in New York City, is that you and Kevin Coolio, the director from France, you guys just hopped on a bike and played in all these courts all over New York. You have a slightly similar approach for the second movie that you made, the Stretch and Bobbito, because once again, you and a friend go on tour in NYC to meet some famous people. And we have video footage of that, and it really is nicely to see how it transcends a well-known audio file to see how people react. So maybe we can play the second video, please. So that was a very young Jigger man when he was still with Jazzo, going back like an oldie but a goodie, a goldie. Yeah, it's really nice to see. Like, this is a very iconic hip hop moment by now. This audio file took a life of its own, basically after the fact, because you've said it before publicly that you guys didn't realize that you just witnessed some like iconic moment. How could you at that time, right? So when that happened, now we have the footage to it. It seems like Jay-Z is not 100% aware that people in the common narrative think that he got a bit killed on that freestyle by Big L.
Well, I mean, that moment was not a battle. I mean, it's been misinterpreted as one. People surely have taken sides and have an opinion about who had the better verse, just as you would on many album group cuts, like, you know, back in the 80s we called like the symphony cuts, you know, like where you would have like G-Rap and Big Daddy Kane, Craig G, and Master Ace, and you'd be like, yo, who had the best verse? G-Rap had the verse. Nah, Kane had the best verse. That's a long-standing tradition in hip-hop to argue. Just, I mean, who's better, LeBron or Michael Jordan, you know? So that's something that is just fun and healthy for people in the community to discuss. But it was not a battle. They didn't go up there to see who was nicer. They were just kind of like two great MCs sharing the moment. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that Big L was murdered. Some people don't know at this point that he was shot in his face on his block in front of his home. And it was just terrible news, you know, terrible news.
Also, it apparently didn't have anything to do with street stuff, right? I think
I don't know the whole story, and honestly, I don't even want to know, you know. But you know, he lived in a volatile and violent community as well as time, and you know, we would all love to have seen Big L reach his full potential as an artist. That's never going to happen. So, as great as this freestyle was, I think what really catapulted it to the extreme stratosphere is that there's that continual question mark about L, like what would he have become if he was still alive? Because look at who he's rhyming side by side with, and look what he became. Like Jay-Z became, you know, this multi-millionaire, 75 million records sold, you know, entrepreneur. I mean, you know, just taking over so many facets of multiple industries. And L was a good businnesman. You know, a lot of people don't realize, like, L had a phenomenal ear. Like, had he ever, like, you know, they put Jay-Z as the head of Def Jam at one point. Like, L brought up Jay-Z to our radio show. L brought up Killer Cam and Murder Mace to our radio show. They wound up selling millions of records too, as Cameron and Mace. You know, L was kind of dude, like, he loved our show. He loved being on it. He loved our audience. And it didn't matter. I mean, we had the same approach with him, Finesse, anybody who we liked. Like, you didn't come up to our show to promote your album. You came up to our show to be a part of hip hop and express yourself. Here's the platform. Here's the mic. Go nuts. And that's what L did. And that's what Jay-Z did that night. And so it was great. It took about 18 months to get Jay-Z on camera. for the film, but it was worth it. And the fact that he shared what he did was mind-blowing.
The reaction of these people is really priceless.
Huh?
Like the concept and the reaction, to see the reaction of these people to their own old verses.
Yeah.
It's pretty priceless.
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
pretty priceless concept.
And, you know, it was a deliberate decision to play them the freestyles off cassette, you know, to bring them back to their childhood, like when we, you know, used to play cassettes and put them in headphones, and, you know, and you can hear the crackle in the cassette because it's aged, and, you know, some of the freestyles are like a dub of a dub, you know, that's the only copy that exists anymore. So, yeah, I mean, it was making the film was, I mean, making both films was just so much fun. Making my next film has been a complete joy, although it's been the most vulnerable I've been of the three, because now, because Rock Rubber 45 is going to be an autobiographical documentary, I have to give the backstory of my career, right? So I'm going into my childhood and my relationship with my parents and my family, and, you know, and things that aren't always comfortable to share in public. And I'm going to be an open book. So, are you
going on that journey by yourself, or do you have another straight man?
Well, I mean, I'm interviewing a lot of, you know, my mom is in it, and my brothers are in it, and you know, my best friend from childhood, my best friend from high school, my best friend from college, and then of course the Rosie Perez's and the Michael Rappaports and the Lin-Manuel Miranda, and, you know, the people who I've collaborated professionally as well. Quincy Jones is in the film, Scottie Pippen, Charles Barkley, you know, Patti LaBelle, who was a mentor to me in high school. These are things that a lot of people don't know about my life, but they're going to discover all these, you know, sort of injections of really well-known people who have had an effect on my life, and I've had an effect on them as well. So,
and to wrap things up, I wanted to ask you about the influence of Eddie Palmieri, because he's coming back in various stages in your life, and especially in that film as well, you said, right? Like,
yeah.
What's...
Well, Eddie and I have a really beautiful history. In 1995, I was invited to Copenhagen, Denmark with Stretch, and we performed out there, and the promoter, DJ Typhoon, wound up booking me in his country like 14 times in the next 7 years. One of those bookings was Eddie Palmieri was on tour. First of all, let me backtrack. Eddie Palmieri has been recording albums since the 1950s. He is a treasure for Latin music. He's won 10 or maybe 11 Grammy Awards. So we're talking about like one of the most accomplished musicians in Latin music history. Anyway, so I opened up for him there. He didn't know who I was. I closed out afterwards, and the first song that I played after their set was Azúcar, Part 2, Part 3, off of the Live at Sing Sing album. And one of the members of his band came up to me and was like, "What do you know about that?" He thought I was Danish. And I was like, "Yo soy Boricua, I'm from New York." Like, he was like, "Oh shit, what are you doing out here?" I was like, "Yo, they flew me out here to do this event." He was like, "Damn," you know, he was like really impressed. So that was like the beginnings of the sort of bond that I had with Eddie and Eddie's band. And then, man, what year was it? I don't recall the exact year, but I met with his lawyer / manager, and they were like, "Yo, we want to redo Harlem River Drive. We would love to have you involved in it somehow." I was like, "Yo, let me know." So nothing happened to that. Eddie hadn't recorded for many years. And in 2011, I was asked to be the opening DJ for his 75th birthday. And at the time, I was directing, writing, producing, doing it in the park, Pickup Basketball NYC. And I just kind of threw it out there. I was like, "Would you want to score the film?" Not, you know, not knowing anything.
As you would do, ask a 11-time Grammy winner to score your independent movie.
"Hey, Quincy Jones, would you like to score my I'm a first-time filmmaker, you know, doing a film with the budget of like, you know, $5. You know, it's like, and the thing was that he had never scored a film. He had never been asked to do one. And he really loved who I am and what I represent and what the film was going to represent. And he jumped on board. And it turned out that he hadn't made any original compositions in years. And what I asked of him, I was like, I want you to create a vibe that is similar to your Harlem River Drive album from 1971. That started something that none of us could have predicted, because he did the 3 songs, we put them in the film, and it lit a flame underneath him, and he got really inspired, and he kept on composing. He has a new album out called Sabiduria, and in process, you know, this started to become this sort of revitalization and interest in the Harlem River Drive album. And then Red Bull got behind it and funded the Harlem River Drive Revisited concert in 2016. I was again asked, it was like the 4th or 5th time I was asked to open up for Eddie Palmieri. I closed after. It's like, that's weird. The DJ's here, you know what time it is. Like, you don't want to go after a legend. It's like, when Eddie Palmieri's concert is over, it's like, I feel like, okay, just get on the mic, say thank you to everybody, say goodbye. Like, but, you know, I've been asked to perform afterwards as well. So, I asked him to be interviewed for my film, and he blew me away by what he shared. And he's a brilliant soul, provocative mind. And again, I encourage all of you in 2018 to keep on your radar the film titled Rock, Rubber 45s. There will be a lot revealed in it that is going to be mind-blowing.
Perfect. And no one has seen any of it so far, except from one dude on the plane who's sitting next to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was telling him yesterday that I taught myself how to edit on Adobe Premiere, and you know, the beauty of modern technology, I can edit anywhere, you know, so long as I have my external hard drive. So I've been editing on flights, but on my flight from Nice to Rome, the dude sitting next to me was like all up in my laptop, like, and I was editing, and like he stood there like with his mouth open for like 30 minutes. And then finally I was editing the Eddie Palmieri concert that Red Bull produced, and towards the end, like it finally gets the footage of me like going through my 7 inches, and the dude was like, "Oh, you're a DJ." I said, "Yeah." It's like, thanks for fucking having your ass all up in my face. But, you know.
I think I speak for everyone that we are as curious as he was to see that.
Good.
So thanks so much for sharing all that with us.
For sure. You can go to rockrubber45s.com or follow at rockrubber45s on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter to see production photos and information and everything.
Right. Thanks, Bobbito.
Are we going to open it up for questions from the crowd?
We do.
Okay. When you talk about Big L, I remember the story of MF Grimm and the story about the recording of the song in Walsh Professor's Live from the Barbecue. I know that MF Grimm got shot when he's been on his way to the studio, and that's the first appearance of Nas in the song. I'm impressed of this story because if that wasn't happen, maybe MF Grimm will be in the place of Nas nowadays. Are there any artists and or MCs that been in your show that you thought that they are very dope, but they stayed underrated?
Yeah, I mean, there's you know, in the 8 years that me and Stretch did the radio show, and then I continued to do the show for 4 years after that. So I was on radio for 12 years. In the 8 years that me and Stretch were on air together, we had 300 unsigned artists come to our show. And I can tell you that there was no shortage of phenomenal MCs. So sure, some kind of broke the plane and went into the stratosphere with record sales and awareness and shows, but there were many who were well deserving, just not in the right place at the right time, or didn't have the right producer, or didn't have the right manager, or didn't have the right record label. That didn't take anything away from their performance on our show. So for example, if you take OC, the longest freestyle in the film, Stretch and Bobbito Radio Changed Lives, is not Nas, it's not Big L, it's not Jay-Z, it's by OC. He is someone who we felt completely embodied the ethos of hip hop and what the best it could present. He was compelling, he was authentic, he was spirited, he was intelligent, great presence on stage, great live show. I mean, he had everything lined up to be a star, and it didn't happen for him. And that's fine, It's not meant for everybody. I didn't get paid to do the radio show. I did it anyway. The best artist, in my estimation, didn't rhyme so they can get a contract and get millions of record sales. They rhymed, as OC said in the song "Time's Up." It's the principle of it. I get a rush when I bust some dope rhymes I wrote that maybe somebody will quote. So that's why, in a very innocent way, that's why we came to hip hop. Stretch and I didn't do the radio show to become globally, renowned. We did a radio show because it was the principle of it. We wanted to play dope music and help great artists be exposed. So yeah, there's a lot of artists.
Can I ask a second?
Oh, yeah, please.
Thank you. How you feel about nowadays radio shows, and is there anything you miss in them, like live performances and freestyles or DJs playing music live? Because we have a lot of nowadays popular shows, but they're already sets which they play. There are not much live appearances like in your show.
I can't really tell you. I stopped listening to radio about 15 years ago, and yeah, that's FM radio, and online radio is even more difficult for me. So that's not to. There are still great radio shows out there that are worthy of your attention. There are amazing artists out there who are making songs that are worthy of your attention. When I retired from radio, I felt like I'd done my duty to the cause, and I had to move on and do other things and focus on other things and put my attention towards other things that challenged me, like filmmaking. Filmmaking is a challenge for me because, as Julian said, I had no experience. Writing a book challenged me. I had never written a book before. Producing TV shows, it's other ways of expressing myself. And so each of those things, because I always strive for excellence in everything that I do, that requires that I'm gonna, just the same way that me and Stretch listen to hours and hours, hundreds of songs a week. That's what I do now when it comes to filmmaking, or when it comes to my basketball tournament, Full Court 21, which is presented in 4 continents around the world and 20 international cities. Everything I do is always original and challenging. So I don't have the time or the interest to really tell you what radio shows are missing now, or what they should do. Or I don't know. It actually it'd be better if you answered that question yourself, because if you're in that mix,
But you also meant live shows, right? Like, did you also mean like hip hop live shows or just radio shows?
I mean live shows in the radio.
Yeah, right. That kind of like the live element.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because, the impetus behind us having so many MCs live back then was that you couldn't hear them otherwise. Like if you were unsigned, there were artists on our show who didn't even have demos. Like Big Pun, when he came up to the show as an unsigned MC, he did not even have a demo. He had never recorded in the studio. So we gave him a platform. But now you can, you know, I know artists who, yeah, look at Chance the rapper. Like, this dude doesn't have a record label deal. You know, he's putting out mixtapes. He's not even putting out vinyl CDs. It's just digital release. And that's it. And he's like, you know, world famous, winning Grammys and everything. So, you know, the whole model has changed. And that doesn't take away the need for live.
Saying about the Chance the rapper, are there any names?
Hold on. You're gonna let her ask a third question? Does anyone else have questions, or which is? I'm just messing with you.
I also really want to hear what you have to say about Chance the Rapper.
No, I don't want to talk about him. I would like to ask about which are your personal favorites from nowadays, new school MCs.
I can't really say. There's a.
Do you follow the scene?
I don't. I'm a vinyl dude, right? So, and I'm a hip hop head who grew up dancing. So a lot of the current rap, I don't find it danceable. And so, as a DJ, you know, who only plays vinyl, that cuts. Like when I go record shopping, you know, if I happen to be like, oh, that record looks interesting, if I listen to it, 9 out of 10 times the record's not gonna be danceable at all. It's just gonna be a hip hop record that's like more like head nod, you know, more about the lyrics and everything, which is great. But because I have limited time to listen to records and because I have limited time to get my records ready to DJ, I prioritize records that I can dance to.
Did you hear about Anderson .Paak?
And now it's a fourth question. Oh my God. Why don't you just sit here, Julian, go back to the crowd. She's taking over your job. Yeah,
are there, I mean, I reckon the answer is probably no for Anderson .Paak.
Is what?
Do you know Anderson .Paak was the question? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm aware of him. I don't know his music well, but I'm aware of him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, of course.
And thank you. Are there any further questions?
Wait, give her a round of applause, please.
Yeah.
Great.
There's an open mic, sir, in the Quasimodo shirt. Lord Quas.
Hi, my question is about the record label Fondavom. I mean, how did you decide to start it, and what was the idea?
And what was what?
The idea.
Oh, the idea. Okay.
To get big like Def Jam, or was just something to do around with?
Yeah. So I had the great fortune of working for Def Jam, as I mentioned, one of the prominent record labels in music history, right? And then I left in '93 to start a label with Pete Nice from the group Third Base called Hoppo. We released an artist named Curious. We also released Count Bass D. When KMD got released from their deal with Elektra, when the Black Bastards album was rejected by the label, we actually tried to grab KMD and put them out on Hoppo, which was distributed by Columbia. I think they were still Columbia CBS. They hadn't became Columbia Sony yet. But Columbia didn't allow us to sign KMD. And we also discovered a group called Mudbones, who had a phenomenal MC. Back to, I guess you asked me, who was the unknown MCs who never really made it. So Mudbones had the lead MC in the group was a kid named Cage. Cage used to come up to me and Stretch's show, crushed it. He became like sort of like underground, like, you know, all-star, if you will. We tried to sign Cage to Hoppo Columbia as well. And none of that happened. It was frustrating for me and Pete, quite honestly. So I was on the radio with Stretch playing a lot of demos when Stretch wasn't there, because still had to put forth great music in the absence of, you know, my favorite DJ in the world. And there was a dude named Rich King who worked at Big Daddy Distribution in New Jersey. And he was like, yo, you got all these incredible demos. What are you doing with them? There's people around the world that would love to have them on vinyl. And I was like, I don't know, you know. First of all, like, we had artists on the show that really were sticklers about us playing promos, but only playing them once, which was really annoying for our listeners. They be calling us up for like a year, like, yo, please play that Godfather Don Kool Keith record. We're like, nah, sorry. It's like totally opposite of today, right? You're like, oh, let me do a Google search, Godfather Don Kool Keith. Oh, where is that? You know, so we were like, we would fuck with people, you know, like, it's like, you want to hear that? We're never playing it again. Yeah. So Rich was like, yo, speak to Godfather Don and Kool Keith about putting out the Cenobites. That was their group. And so I spoke to them, and it took some convincing, but they were like, yo, cool, go for it. So we pressed up like, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 copies of the Cenobites. That was the first release. That was in December of '95. And it turned out that I was really ahead of the curve, because 96 or 97, Rich King and Joe Abajian partnered and started Fat Beast Distribution. And Fat Beast Distribution became the first kind of like company that was really, okay, like, we're just pushing hip hop and independent hip hop. And this is what we're about for the culture, because we're from the culture and we are the culture. And they had the Fat Beat store as well. And then ABB came out, and Stone's Throw and Eastern Conference and Def Jux and all these incredible independent labels, like from 96 to 97 on. But I'm like a little bit before that with Fondlem. And so I put out Sai and Yeshua the Poe D, and I put out MF Doom, his first release, and Cage's first release, and the Arsonist's first release, and all these groups did very well in the independent scene. And you know, it's just, I don't know, it's just in the right place at the right time with the right vision. And Fondlem was a great label, but around 2001 I decided to dead it, and I started my second label, which was Fruit Meat. And yeah, and I started putting out music that was more representative of the full scope of what I love. You know, I put out Spanish Harlem Orchestra, Vinny and Mojica, who sang on a lot of hip hop records. I put out Binkus, a dope hip hop record. And then my last label was Álala, which has been a strictly 7-inch label. So, but I've only put out records when I've felt strongly about them. So I never had the label to pay my rent. So I never was like, oh my God, I got another new release. I'll just put out anything. It's always been like really spaced out, and just, this record's incredible. It's not on vinyl. Let me put it out.
You said your last label was Álala. Is that defunct now? Is that not?
I haven't put out my last release on Álala was a song featuring myself. What are you laughing? That's not funny.
It's just like the first catalog number of Fondlem is also.
Yeah, I was on that too.
You were on that one.
So I wrote a song. I wrote a spoken word piece called "Park Pickup Player" for the film "Doing in the Park," and I had Mark DeClivelo, a really talented producer based in LA, remix it, and we couldn't find the right place for it in Doing It in the Park, Pick Up Basketball NYC, so I decided to release it as a 7-inch, and that was the last release that I did on Álala. It's still available around if or any collectors or DJs want to scoop it up. And I believe it's available on iTunes too, although I don't know. I'm not a digital dude. But yeah, check it out. All right?
I have another one, if it's okay.
Oh my God.
It's my final one. So
shoot.
He should sit here. Julian, you're out of a job, man.
I'm done, yeah.
You
I have a
said
Saturday night now.
you work with MF Doom. So can you share something like a story with him or something from the creative process?
Sure, of course. Do you know the song Rhymes Like Dimes?
Yeah.
Of course, right? Yeah. So Rhymes Like Dimes is a very prominent song in Doom's career. It's on his first album, Doomsday, which I released on my label, Fondlem. And he called me up and said, yo, Bob, I need to sample 100 Ways. I don't have the record. It's not a rare record. It's, yeah, it's sold millions of copies off a Quincy Jones album. And I said, sure, come over. So he comes over with a sampler. He plugs it into my mixer, you know, puts the record on. I'm watching magic before my eyes. He's like looping it. He loops it like in 10 minutes, you know, puts the drums, you know. He does the rhymes. And he's like, yo, I got the microphone. Like, why don't you just hop on the end of the record? And I was like, nah, you know, what am I gonna say? It's like, you just do it for me. I said, all right, whatever. So he throws a beat and he gives me the mic and I'm talking nonsense at the end of the record. And still to this day, yeah, it was like, when did I come out? 99, I think. Yeah, so it's almost 20 years later. And like, people on Twitter constantly like, mashed potatoes, you know, it's like applesauce, like quoting the most nonsensical appearance in rap history. Like, it just made no sense. It made no sense for a minute. I just talked out of my ass and people loved it, you know, which I don't know what that says for the fans of Fondulum, but you know, it was a fun moment. I was glad to be a part of it. And that record's been re-released a bunch of times. You know, I've never seen any royalties off of it, but it's cool.
Thanks.
Last question, maybe.
Oh, Irina.
Hey, everybody, give Irina a round of applause.
Just give it up for Irina, please.
Come on.
A wonderful host over here.
So my question is coming just from curiosity, and maybe it's a funny story about why you pick up cucumber slice, how it happened. DJ Cucumber Slice.
Yes. Okay, well, so I was known as Bobbito the Barber, the Edge of King of Swing, back in the early 90s on the hip-hop show with Stretch. And I started DJing around 95, and was very light with it initially. And the first woman to give me a weekly gig at Coney Island High said, yo, Bob, you gotta, and you know, we weren't thinking about branding back then, you know, or marketing or, you know, nothing like that. Well, she was just like, yo, like, you gotta come up with a different nickname for you as a DJ, you know, like Bobbito the Barber doesn't really quite fit. I was like, yeah, it's a good idea. And she was like, how about Cucumber Slice? It's literally the first thing she said. Now, have any of you ever heard of Claw Money? She's got a clothing line. She's a famous graffiti artist now. She's done design collaborations with Nike. And she's like well-known, like streetwear, you know. And it was her. She wasn't known at the time. She was Claudia, you know, my homegirl Claudia. But yeah, Claw Money gave me the nickname Cucumber Slice. And I just ran with it. I was like, word, I'm Cucumber Slice. So, but when I turned 40, I retired Cucumber Slice. It just didn't feel right being 40 years old, being like, my name is Cucumber Slice. So then I shifted back to Kool Bob Love, which was the earlier nickname that MC Search from the group Third Base had given me. All of this will be detailed with archival footage and photos in my next film, Rock Rubber 45s. Yes. All right.